Hello, class. Today we're going to read an excerpt from The Jungle. Yesterday you took notes on The Jungle as well as one other text, and we talked about um, synthesizing information as well as author's purpose. Now, we've talked a lot about author's purpose throughout the year, but this is a different type of text, right? We're starting to get into investigative journalism, which was really big in the early 20th century um, due to what are known as the muckrakers, which you probably have studied in your history class. So, as we read this today, I really want to challenge you to consider why Sinclair was writing what he did and what his purpose was. Okay? So let's go ahead and get started. We will stop and annotate the text throughout, so make sure you have your book in front of you. If you are following along in your textbook, the story starts on page 529 and ends on 533. So go ahead, open your book to 529 if you have it. If you don't have it, feel free to follow along on the screen or to open the online edition of the book. Upton Sinclair, 1878 to 1968, was sent by a newspaper to Chicago to investigate the conditions in the stockyards where animals were processed into meat. His research led not only to an investigative report, but to his most famous novel, The Jungle, 1906, which he was forced to self-publish after several publishers turned down the manuscript. The novel exposed unsanitary conditions in the meatpacking industry and led to reforms. Jurgis Rudkus, the main character, is a Lithuanian immigrant who works in the stockyards. As you read, make note of the writer's voice or use of sentence structure, diction, and tone. This will help you infer the author's purpose and compare this text with the investigative journalism article Food Product Design that follows. We will be reading Food Product Design probably in the next week that you have class. But do take thorough notes with this because we will be comparing the two texts. So just a reminder before we start, this is an excerpt from a book, which means we're reading just a couple pages of an entire book. So if this is something that interests you once we're done, I do have copies of the novel in my classroom. You actually can find free versions of it online. And do know that, it actually is a really good book overall. So if you want to read it, just let me know and I'll help you access the text.
Jurgis heard of these things little by little in the gossip of those who were obliged to perpetrate them. It seemed as if every time you met a person from a new department, you heard of new swindles and new crimes. There was, for instance, a Lithuanian who was a cattle butcher for the plant where Maria had worked, which killed meat for canning only. And to hear this man describe the animals which came to his place would have been worthwhile for a Dante or a Zola. It seemed that they must have agencies all over the country to hunt out old and crippled and diseased cattle to be canned. There were cattle which had been fed on whiskey malt, the refuse of the breweries, and had become what the men called steerly, which means covered with boils. It was a nasty job killing these, for when you plunged your knife into them, they would burst and splash foul-smelling stuff into your face. And when a man's sleeves were smeared with blood and his hands steeped in it, how was he ever to wipe his face or to clear his eyes so that he could see? It was stuff such as this that made the embalmed beef that had killed several times as many United States soldiers as all the bullets of the Spaniards. Only the army beef, besides, was not fresh canned. It was old stuff that had been lying for years in the cellars.
All right, so let's take a look at this first paragraph, and I want you to underline the vivid images in the two sentences about cattle and the workers who slaughter them. So what in paragraph 1 is a vivid image or a very clear image about the cattle and the workers who slaughter them. So you should have underlined the refuse of the breweries, covered with boils, plunged your knife into them, burst and splashed foul-smelling stuff into your eyes, and smeared with blood. So again, the refuse of breweries, covered with boils, plunged your knife into them, burst and splashed foul-smelling stuff into your face, and smeared with blood. Now, what response is the author trying to provoke in the reader with these images? Think about, as you're hearing that, what are some of the thoughts going into your head? What's your reaction to what we're being told? If you're thinking something along the lines of they're meant to provoke the reader's outrage that food could be prepared in such foul conditions, then you're probably right. I mean, this is gross. They're saying these people are so dirty and the situation is so dirty they can't even wipe their own eyes. That does not describe a clean facility that we would want our food to be coming from.
Then one Sunday evening, Jurgis sat puffing his pipe by the kitchen stove and talking with an old fellow whom Jonas had introduced and who worked in the canning rooms at Durham's. And so Jurgis learned a few things about the great and only Durham canned goods, which had become a national institution. They were regular alchemists at Durham's. They advertised a mushroom ketchup, and the men who made it did not know what a mushroom looked like. They advertised potted chicken, and it was like the boarding house soup of the comic papers through which a chicken had walked with rubbers on. Perhaps they had a secret process for making chickens chemically. Who knows, said Jurgis's friend. The things that went into the mixture were tripe, and the fat of pork, and beef suet, and hearts of beef, and finally the waste ends of veal, when they had any. They put these up in several grades and sold them at several prices, but the contents of the cans all came out of the same hopper. And then there was potted game and potted grouse, potted ham and deviled ham, deviled as the men called it. Deviled ham was made out of the waste ends of smoked beef that were too small to be sliced by the machines, and also tripe, dyed with chemicals so that it would not show white, and trimmings of hams and corned beef and potatoes, skins and all, and finally the hard cartilaginous gullets of beef after the tongues had been cut out. All this ingenious mixture was ground up and flavored with spices to make it taste like something. Anybody who could invent a new imitation had been sure of a fortune from old Durham, said Jurgis's informant. But it was hard to think of anything new in a place where so many sharp wits had been at work for so long, where men welcomed tuberculosis in the cattle they were feeding because it made them fatten more quickly, and where they bought up all the old rancid butter left over in the grocery stores of a continent and oxidized it by a forced air process to take away the odor, rechurned it with skim milk, and sold it in bricks in the cities. Up to a year or two ago, it had been the custom to kill horses in the yards, ostensibly for fertilizer. But after long agitation, the newspapers had been able to make the public realize that the horses were being canned. Now, it was against the law to kill horses in Packingtown, and the law was really complied with, for the present at any rate. Any day, however, one might see sharp-horned and shaggy-haired creatures running with the sheep. And yet, what a job you would have to get the public to believe that a good part of what it buys for lamb and mutton is really goat's flesh.